I thought I had the perfect marriage until I reached for a jar on the top shelf of my pantry. What I found hidden inside did not just expose my husband as a financial fraud, it revealed a cold and calculated plot orchestrated by my own mother-in-law to drain my life savings and quite possibly arrange my death for a $2 million payout. My name is Caroline. I am 34 years old and my entire career is built on catching people in their lies. As a senior commercial real estate appraiser in Chicago, I spend my days analyzing zoning laws, unearthing buried liens, and calling out developers on their inflated valuations. Numbers simply do not lie, and paperwork always leaves a trail. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to burn down your own life just to survive the people who claimed to love you. If there is one thing you should know about me, it is that I never miss the details. Yet somehow I completely failed to appraise the man sleeping in my own bed. My husband Preston was 36 years old and worked as a wealth manager at a boutique downtown financial firm. He was the picture of corporate success. He wore custom, tailored Italian suits, drove a leased silver Porsche, and projected the aura of a man who held the world firmly in the palm of his hand. We had been married for 6 years and lived in a stunning $1.2 million brownstone in Lincoln Park. I was the one who provided the massive 20% down payment using years of my hard-earned savings. Preston handled our daily finances because, according to him, it was his professional expertise. I trusted him implicitly. That was my first and most fatal mistake. Last Thursday, Preston packed his designer weekender bag and kissed my cheek with practiced affection. He claimed he had an urgent 5-day business trip to Aspen to court a high-net-worth client. This deal is going to set us up for the next decade, care, he had said, flashing that pristine smile of his. I wished him luck, kissed him back, and looked forward to enjoying a quiet house to myself. By Saturday afternoon, I decided to tackle some deep spring cleaning. I pulled up a sturdy wooden step stool to clear out the highest, most neglected shelf in our walk-in pantry. I intended to reorganize my homemade preserves and properly inventory our dry goods. As I reached all the way to the dusty back corner, my fingers brushed against a heavy, opaque ceramic jar that did not match the rest of my glass collection. I pulled it down and popped the airtight seal, expecting to find stale flour or ancient coffee beans. Instead, I tipped the jar over and 3 items spilled heavily onto the cool granite countertop. A cheap prepaid burner phone, a strange set of brass keys, and a thick, professionally folded legal document. My brow furrowed in confusion as I stared at the strange assortment of items. I picked up the thick document first. The heavy texture of the legal paper felt instantly familiar to my touch. I handle similar contracts every single day at the appraisal firm. Unfolding the crisp pages, I stared at the bold black heading printed at the very top. Deed of Trust, Second Mortgage. My eyes scanned the dense lines of text with rapid professional precision. My brain immediately began extracting the crucial data points. It was a secondary loan taken out against our Lincoln Park brownstone for a staggering $400,000. The property I had poured my blood, sweat, and tears into securing was secretly leveraged to the hilt. But what made the blood freeze entirely in my veins was the final signature page. There, right next to Preston's loopy, arrogant autograph, was my name, Caroline Hayes. I stared at the blue ink for a long time. I had never seen this paper before in my life, let alone signed it in front of a notary. The forgery was meticulous and would easily pass a casual glance by a busy bank clerk. But as an appraiser who scrutinizes legal documents for a living, I immediately spotted the glaring errors. The slant on the capital C was entirely wrong, lacking my usual sharp angle. There was a distinct hesitation in the curve of the H, indicating someone slowly tracing the letters rather than writing them fluidly. Preston had deliberately forged my signature to illegally pull equity out of my home. A violent wave of nausea hit me, forcing me to grip the edge of the kitchen island. The man who had promised to protect and cherish me had committed federal wire fraud and identity theft to strip the value from the only true asset I owned. I thought about the long hours I had worked, the overtime, the stressful negotiations with hostile property developers just to afford that down payment. Preston had essentially stolen $400,000 from me with the stroke of a pen. Most women might have collapsed on the kitchen floor in a puddle of tears. They might have called their husbands screaming and demanding answers. But crying is a luxury for women who actually have a safety net to catch them when they fall. I had no one but myself, and I was standing on the edge of a massive financial cliff. Crying would not recover my stolen equity, and it certainly would not protect me from whatever else my husband had been hiding in the shadows. Instead of breaking down, the cold, pragmatic side of my brain kicked into absolute overdrive. If he was willing to commit a felony to secure a loan, there was no telling how deep his deception truly went. My attention shifted to the cheap black burner phone resting next to the fraudulent mortgage papers. I picked it up, feeling a dark, creeping dread spreading through my chest. The screen lit up instantly. It was not even password protected. Preston was so arrogant he assumed I would never find his secret stash. I swiped the screen open and went straight to the messaging application. There was only one contact saved in the entire phone, simply labeled with the letter B. I did not need to guess who B was. The sharp, demanding tone of the text messages could only belong to one person. Beatrice, my 62-year-old mother-in-law. Beatrice was the absolute epitome of fake old money elitism. She wore vintage designer suits, hosted pretentious country club luncheons, and treated everyone around her like the hired help. For 6 long years, she had subjected me to a relentless stream of toxic remarks. Now her name was glowing on a secret phone hidden in my pantry. I scrolled up to the most recent messages, and my eyes widened in sheer horror. "Have you updated the beneficiary forms on her life insurance policy yet?" Beatrice had texted. "The grace period ends on Tuesday." Preston replied just a few hours later. "It is handled, Mom. I forged the witness signature yesterday. If anything happens to her, the $2 million goes straight to the new trust." I stopped breathing. The air in my kitchen suddenly felt suffocatingly thin. If anything happens to her. The sheer, calculated malice of those words echoed loudly in my silent house. I kept reading, unable to tear my eyes away from the screen. Good Beatrice had replied, "Make sure she stays entirely out of the accounts this weekend. The Aspen trip is costing a fortune, but we must keep up appearances for the investors." "Do not worry," Preston texted back. "She thinks I am working. Let her stay home and play house. I do not want her snooping while I finalize the transfer." I dropped the burner phone onto the counter as if it had physically burned my skin. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird desperately trying to escape. This was not just a case of financial infidelity or a secret gambling habit. My husband had secretly mortgaged my home, drained the equity I had built, and alongside his mother was actively tracking my $2 million life insurance policy. They were funding a lavish trip to Aspen and deliberately keeping me isolated at home. The realization washed over me like a bucket of ice water. Preston and Beatrice were not just trying to bankrupt me, they were actively discussing my death as a lucrative payout. I was married to a monster, and his mother was the puppet master pulling the strings. But they had made one catastrophic miscalculation in their grand master plan. They left the physical paperwork and the digital evidence right in the house of a woman whose literal job is to expose fraud. They thought I was just a naive, hard-working wife who would blindly trust her husband's financial jargon. They assumed I would never look at the top shelf of the pantry, never question the missing funds, and never pull the county records. They severely underestimated me. I was not going to demand an explanation. Explanations are for misunderstandings, and this was a financial execution. If they wanted to play a high-stakes game of deception, I was going to rewrite the rules entirely and burn their entire board to ashes. I marched straight out of the kitchen and strode down the hallway to my home office. I locked the heavy oak door behind me, a strict habit formed from years of handling highly confidential commercial property data, and booted up my dual monitor workstation. I did not shed a single tear. Crying is a luxury for women who have someone to catch them when they fall. I had no one, and I was standing on the edge of a massive financial cliff. My hands were perfectly steady as I typed my highly secure login credentials into my professional appraisal software. This specialized system granted me direct, unfiltered access to county databases, property deeds, hidden tax liens, and financial judgments across the entire state. Preston thought he was the only one who truly understood money, but he was merely a salesman pushing inflated portfolios to gullible clients. I was an auditor of reality. I pulled up our property records first. The $400,000 second mortgage stared back at me from the glaring white screen, officially recorded with the county clerk just 3 days prior. The stolen funds had been immediately dispersed to a holding company I had never heard of before. I cross-referenced the holding company name through a federal corporate registry database I use daily for tracking shell corporations in shady commercial real estate deals. I noticed the registered agent was a law firm known for establishing blind trusts for high-risk clients. The address listed was a virtual mail drop in Wilmington, Delaware. I ran a secondary search bypassing the standard public interface to access the deep-level ownership filings. That is when Preston's name appeared as the sole managing member. It took me less than 15 minutes to unravel my husband's entire financial existence. Preston had not just taken out a fraudulent second mortgage on our home, he had set up a complex, desperate web of 3 different shell companies. Using his credentials as a wealth manager, he had been funneling massive amounts of money into offshore cryptocurrency accounts and high-stakes sports betting syndicates based in the Caribbean. I pulled the associated credit reports and public judgments linked directly to his social security number, exploiting a known loophole in my background check software. The numbers cascading down my monitor were a horrifying testament to his financial ruin. The total debt did not stop at the $400,000 stolen from the equity of our house. He had leveraged predatory personal loans, triggered massive margin calls on his client accounts, and suffered catastrophic cryptocurrency losses. My husband was completely underwater, drowning in over $800,000 of toxic, inescapable liabilities. The financial genius that Beatrice constantly bragged about to her country club friends was nothing but a desperate, degenerate gambler wearing a $3,000 suit. He was bleeding out financially, and I was the designated sacrificial lamb meant to cover his massive deficit with my life insurance payout. As the laser printer whirred beside me, spitting out page after page of damning evidence, I thought about Beatrice. My mother-in-law was the absolute epitome of fake old money elitism. She wore vintage designer suits, hosted pretentious luncheons, and treated everyone around her like the hired help. For 6 years, she had subjected me to a relentless stream of toxic remarks and subtle insults. I remembered a Thanksgiving dinner where she loudly announced to the entire table that my commercial appraisal work was a dreary blue-collar desk job, while publicly praising Preston for being a visionary asset manager. She had sneered at my middle-class upbringing, reminding me constantly how lucky I was to be elevated into their prestigious family. Hindsight is a brutal, unforgiving teacher. Their family had absolutely no wealth left to speak of. They were financial parasites feeding off my stable, dreary income to maintain their hollow facade. I needed to know exactly what was happening in Aspen right now. I left my office and went to the guest bedroom closet, digging through a storage box of old electronics until I found Preston's discarded tablet. He rarely used it anymore, but I knew it was still connected to our secure home network. I powered the device on and stared at the lock screen. He was incredibly arrogant and remarkably unoriginal. I typed in 1964, Beatrice's birth year. The tablet unlocked instantly. I bypassed the home screen and tapped directly into his synchronized photo stream application. The screen refreshed rapidly, pulling high-resolution images taken just hours ago directly from his primary phone. There was no high-net-worth client. There was no crucial business meeting. The Aspen trip was a lavish, over-the-top 60th birthday bash for Beatrice. I stared at a photo of my mother-in-law wearing a custom designer ski suit, holding a bottle of expensive champagne, standing triumphantly in front of a massive private rented chalet. I scrolled past images of extravagant ice sculptures, imported beluga caviar stations, and a massive ice luge carved into the shape of the letter B. They were not just spending money, they were burning it for social validation. I zoomed in on a group photo taken on a sun-drenched terrace overlooking the snow-capped mountains. Preston stood with his arm around his mother, grinning with the relaxed confidence of a man who believed his problems were permanently solved. The background of the photos revealed a sickening truth. The entire extended family was there. Preston, his brother, aunts, uncles, everyone. They were all in Aspen, toasting to Beatrice's milestone birthday, eating gourmet food and skiing on private slopes. They had deliberately excluded me to keep me completely away from the bank accounts while Preston finalized his theft. They were celebrating with my money. My fingers flew across my laptop keyboard as I immediately logged into our joint banking portal. This was the primary savings account I had been faithfully pouring my annual performance bonuses into for 6 years. I had skipped luxury vacations, worked grueling 80-hour weeks, and negotiated ruthless contracts just to build that safety net. This was the money specifically earmarked for our future children for fertility treatments, if we needed them for college funds, and for sudden medical emergencies. I watched the loading icon spin for a fraction of a second before the balance loaded on the screen. It was zero. Absolutely nothing remained, not a single cent. The physical sensation of seeing that zero was like stepping into a freezing shower. My lungs seized, refusing to draw air for a long, painful moment. Every late night at the office, every weekend, I sacrificed while Preston played golf with his mother, every budget spreadsheet I meticulously maintained to ensure our financial security had been rendered entirely meaningless by a single wire transfer. I clicked on the transaction history, my eyes scanning the ledger with cold, calculating rage. A recent wire transfer of exactly $50,000 had been authorized and completed just 2 days prior. The funds were funneled directly to a luxury concierge service located in Colorado. My hands gripped the edge of my mahogany desk so hard my knuckles turned completely white. My husband had stolen my life savings, the future of our unborn children, to throw a vanity birthday party for his toxic, manipulative mother, all while plotting to collect my life insurance. They thought I was compliant. They thought I would stay home like an obedient wife, cleaning out pantries and waiting for my visionary husband to return from his stressful business trip. They assumed I would simply accept a tragic accident or a sudden financial crisis without ever looking under the hood of their lies. They severely underestimated my capacity for destruction. I sat in the quiet of my home office, surrounded by printed proof of their felonies. I was not going to call Preston screaming. I was not going to demand a tearful explanation or beg for my money back. I realized in that moment that confronting a parasite only warns it to attach harder. I was going to sever the host entirely. I needed an ally, someone inside the family who was just as smart, just as marginalized by Beatrice, and who had the exact skill set required to track missing money. I reached for my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found her name. The dominoes were perfectly aligned, and I was about to push them all over with devastating force. I picked up my smartphone and scrolled past the dozens of useless contacts until I found the exact name I needed. I pressed dial and held the phone to my ear. I was calling Nia. She was 33 years old, an African-American forensic auditor, and the only person in my husband's family who actually possessed a functional brain and a moral compass. Nia was married to Preston's younger brother, Spencer, From the very first day she married into this pretentious family, Beatrice had treated her with a relentless stream of thinly veiled racism and outright hostility. My mother-in-law constantly criticized Nia's natural hair, calling it unprofessional for country club dinners. Beatrice mockingly referred to Nia's high-powered career success as aggressive and regularly demanded that Spencer step up and control his wife. Nia, being a fiercely independent powerhouse who tracked corporate embezzlers for a living, never took the bait. But I knew she despised Beatrice with every fiber of her being. The phone rang twice before her sharp professional voice answered the line. Nia speaking. I did not waste time with casual pleasantries or emotional apologies. Nia, it is Caroline, I said, keeping my voice in a low, lethal register. I need you to meet me at the coffee shop on Michigan Avenue in exactly 20 minutes. Bring your highly encrypted work laptop. I have a terrible feeling your husband might be doing the exact same thing mine is doing. There was a brief, heavy silence on the other end of the line, followed immediately by the crisp sound of a leather briefcase snapping shut. I am already on my way, Nia replied, and then the line went dead. I grabbed my oversized tote bag and carefully packed the forged mortgage deed, the prepaid burner phone, and the massive stack of financial printouts. I walked out of my brownstone, locking the heavy front door behind me. The crisp Chicago wind hit my face as I hailed a cab, but I felt absolutely nothing. My mind was a steel trap. The grief had been entirely replaced by a burning, calculating need for absolute retaliation. I arrived at the coffee shop 10 minutes later and secured a secluded booth in the far back corner, positioned perfectly away from any prying eyes. I ordered a black coffee and waited. I knew Nia would not let me down. She understood the language of numbers, hidden assets, and deception better than anyone else on the planet. I watched the glass door, my heart beating with a steady, rhythmic precision. We were about to dissect our husbands' financial lives, and I was fully prepared to cut straight to the bone. Nia arrived exactly on time, looking immaculate in a tailored charcoal blazer and sharp trousers. Her eyes were calculating and alert as she slid into the leather booth across from me. I did not offer a polite greeting. Instead, I unzipped my tote bag and slid the thick folder of printed public records, the forged mortgage deed, and the burner phone directly across the wooden table. Nia opened the folder without a word. Her eyes scanned the columns of massive debt, the offshore shell companies, and the fraudulent signatures with the terrifying speed of a seasoned professional who hunted white-collar criminals for breakfast. I watched her jaw tighten as she processed the $400,000 second mortgage. Then she picked up the burner phone and read the text messages regarding my life insurance policy. She did not gasp. She did not offer me any empty, patronizing sympathies or ask how I was feeling. Instead, her expression shifted from professional curiosity to absolute, ice-cold fury. She reached into her designer bag, pulled out her heavily encrypted laptop, and set it squarely on the table between us. Caroline, Nia said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I have suspected Spencer was hiding money for 6 months, but he gaslit me every single time I brought up the glaring discrepancies in our joint accounts. Let me run a trace on this IP address and these shell corporations right now. For the next 30 minutes, the only sound between us was the rapid, aggressive clatter of Nia's manicured fingernails flying across her keyboard. She bypassed firewalls and accessed secure banking portals with terrifying efficiency. What she unearthed made my stomach churn all over again. Preston was not acting alone. Spencer was deeply involved in the exact same financial conspiracy. Nia turned the screen toward me, displaying a complex flowchart of wire transfers she had just generated. I stared at the data, my mind connecting the dots. Spencer had set up a mirror holding company. He had been slowly draining their emergency funds, funneling the money through the same offshore cryptocurrency platforms Preston used. Nia highlighted a specific transaction that had cleared just 48 hours ago. Spencer just wired $20,000 from our high-yield savings account directly to the exact same Aspen concierge service. Nia stated, her eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. He told me he was moving the money into a secured treasury bond. He lied to my face. The reality of the situation crashed down on us both. Our husbands were working together to fund their mother's lavish birthday party. They were literally funding Beatrice's vanity lifestyle with our hard-earned paychecks, while simultaneously treating us like second-class citizens. The racial microaggressions Nia had endured for years, and the classist insults I had swallowed silently were all part of a calculated smokescreen. Beatrice needed to make us feel incredibly small, so we would never realize we were the ones actually holding all the power and providing all the money. My sister-in-law closed her eyes for a brief second, taking a deep breath to compose herself. When she opened them again, the brilliant forensic auditor was completely gone. In her place was a woman ready to burn her marriage to the ground. I leaned across the table and pointed at the screen. Dig deeper into Beatrice's accounts, I instructed. Pull the primary family trust. I want to see exactly how much old money she actually has left to her name. Nia nodded, her fingers flying across the keys once more as she initiated a deep dive into the legendary family trust. Beatrice had spent decades weaponizing this trust, using it to intimidate everyone around her and solidify her position at the absolute top of the local social hierarchy. Preston and Spencer had always acted like they were heirs to a massive fortune destined to inherit millions. It took Nia less than 5 minutes to breach the public tax filings and cross-reference the entity data. She let out a harsh, humorless laugh that sent a chill down my spine. "Caroline, look at this," she commanded. I leaned closer to the monitor. The balance sheet for the generational family trust was staring back at me. It was empty. The accounts had been completely drained. The trust had officially filed for quiet bankruptcy 3 years ago. The entire old money facade was a massive, carefully orchestrated lie. Beatrice had squandered every last cent of her inherited wealth on failed real estate ventures, exorbitant luxury shopping sprees, and maintaining her ridiculous country club status. Since the money ran out, Preston and Spencer had stepped in to keep her afloat. They had been systematically stealing from their highly successful working-class wives to fund their mother's extravagant lifestyle. Every designer dress Beatrice wore, every charity gala she sponsored, every bottle of imported champagne she drank had been paid for by my commercial property appraisals and Nia's forensic accounting audits. We were the absolute breadwinners of the family, and they had been bleeding us dry while treating us like garbage. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. Preston's massive gambling debts were a desperate attempt to win back the family fortune. Spencer's hidden wire transfers were his contribution to keeping the illusion alive. And my $2 million life insurance policy was their ultimate exit strategy. They were entirely bankrupt morally and financially. Nia slammed her laptop shut, the sound echoing sharply in the quiet coffee shop. "We have exactly 48 hours before they fly back from Aspen," I said, my voice steady and resolute. "I do not want to just pack my bags and leave them. I want to annihilate them legally and financially. I want them to lose everything." Nia smiled, and it was a terrifyingly beautiful sight. "Oh, honey," she replied, sliding her laptop back into her bag. "They messed with a senior appraiser and a federal forensic auditor. We are not just going to leave them. We are going to leave them entirely destitute and sitting in federal custody. We are going to strip away every single asset they have. And we are going to do it before they even finish their birthday cake." I nodded in agreement, feeling a powerful, unbreakable alliance forged between us. We were no longer victims of their deceit. We were the architects of their absolute destruction. We left the coffee shop with a singular focus, leaving our half-empty cups sitting on the table. There was no time to waste, and we needed someone who specialized in absolute legal annihilation. I called a highly connected contact from my commercial real estate network, who recommended a ruthless, high-powered divorce attorney named Jacqueline Reed. Jacqueline was legendary throughout Chicago for dismantling hidden assets and stripping fraudulent spouses of everything they falsely claimed to own. I requested an emergency meeting, and within 20 minutes, Nia and I were taking the private executive elevator up to her corner office on the 50th floor. Jacqueline sat behind a massive modern glass desk, looking impeccably sharp and entirely unimpressed by the usual emotional sob stories she encountered daily. We did not bring her tears or complaints. We brought her a mountain of actionable, verified evidence. I slid the thick, heavy folder across the smooth glass surface. Jacqueline opened it carefully, her eyes tracking the forged mortgage document, the cryptocurrency ledgers, and the offshore gambling debts with predatory precision. She did not offer us any empty, patronizing sympathies. Instead, a slow, calculating smile spread across her face. "You ladies have done half of my job for me," she said, pulling a fresh legal pad from her top drawer. She asked what our ultimate goal was here today. I looked at Nia, then turned my gaze back to Jacqueline. "We want immediate and irrevocable separation of all our marital assets," I stated clearly. "We want them completely locked out of our homes, our bank accounts, and our lives before they even have the chance to board their return flights from Aspen." Jacqueline nodded approvingly and buzzed her paralegal immediately. She initiated the rapid filing for 2 emergency ex parte temporary restraining orders. Because Preston and Spencer had committed documented severe financial fraud and were actively draining our marital assets, the judge would grant the protective orders immediately without requiring the presence of our husbands. This meant they were legally blocked from stepping foot on our respective properties the moment they returned to Chicago. But we did not stop there. We signed the official divorce petitions right then and there, making our intentions legally binding. I then handed Jacqueline the printed text messages from the burner phone, highlighting Beatrice and Preston discussing my life insurance policy in cold blood. Jacqueline read the horrific exchange, her expression hardening into absolute stone. "This crosses the line from simple financial abuse into a severe threat to your personal safety," she stated, her voice tight with professional outrage. She began contacting the insurance providers right away. "We officially revoked Preston and Spencer as the primary beneficiaries on all of our life insurance policies, replacing them with trusted charitable organizations. There would be no $2 million payout for my husband. If I died, he would get absolutely nothing." Jacqueline drafted the legal documents with terrifying efficiency, ensuring every single legal loophole was permanently closed. We were legally insulated. Our homes were protected by strict court order, and our lives were securely detethered from their greedy grasp. But family court was only the first battlefield. While Jacqueline finalized the divorce filings and the restraining orders, I pulled out the secondary stack of documents I had prepared. The civil matters were securely handled, but Preston had crossed a massive line that family court could not fully address alone. It was time to deal with the federal crimes he had committed under my name. I left the high-rise law office and headed straight to the regional field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation in downtown Chicago. I had called ahead, leveraging my professional credentials as a senior commercial real estate appraiser who frequently cooperated with federal investigators on major corporate property fraud cases. They knew my reputation and understood I did not waste their time with frivolous complaints. I met with a special agent in the white-collar crime division, a sharp, observant woman who appreciated clear, heavily documented evidence. We sat in a sterile, brightly lit interview room, and I slid the original forged deed of trust across the cold metal table. "This is a fraudulent second mortgage for $400,000, taken out against my primary residence," I explained, keeping my voice entirely devoid of emotion. "The property is federally backed, and the signature on the borrower line was blatantly forged by my husband, Preston. He used his professional position as a wealth manager to bypass the standard banking protocols and expedite the funding." The agent examined the document carefully, noting the distinct physical discrepancies I pointed out in the forged signature. But the mortgage fraud was only the very first piece of the complex puzzle. I then presented the detailed financial tracking documents Nia had compiled during our meeting at the coffee shop. These comprehensive spreadsheets traced the $400,000 as it was rapidly dispersed into a series of shady offshore shell companies. I explained exactly how Preston had crossed state lines to establish these fake corporate entities, and how he was actively using the stolen funds to finance illegal sports betting syndicates based in the Caribbean. Committing massive wire fraud across state and international borders elevates this from a standard domestic dispute to a severe federal crime. He did not just steal money from his wife. He used a federally insured banking institution to launder stolen real estate equity into an illegal gambling operation. The agent looked up from the spreadsheets, her eyes narrowing, as the full scope of Preston's incredible arrogance became crystal clear. The paperwork was absolutely flawless. Nia and I had cross-referenced every single IP address, every Swift code, and every digital footprint Preston had carelessly left behind in his desperate, frantic attempt to cover his massive debts. I also handed over the direct contact information for the Federal Housing Finance Agency, as I had already submitted a formal whistleblower complaint to their internal fraud division earlier that same morning. They take mortgage fraud incredibly seriously, especially when it involves a licensed wealth manager exploiting banking loopholes for personal gain. The special agent thanked me for the impeccably organized dossier and assured me that an official investigation would be opened immediately. By the time I walked out of the intimidating federal building, the unstoppable wheels of justice were already turning. Preston thought he was an untouchable mastermind playing high-stakes financial games completely above the law. He failed to realize that when you commit federal wire fraud and leave a paper trail a mile wide, the government does not care about your expensive tailored suits or your exclusive country club memberships. They only care about the hard numbers, and his numbers were a catastrophic federal offense waiting to implode. With the civil and federal legal traps firmly locked into place, there was only one remaining battlefield to conquer before we boarded our flights to Aspen. We had exactly 48 hours before Beatrice's luxurious birthday weekend came to an end, and Nia was absolutely determined to make sure they spent the remainder of their trip in complete financial terror. We regrouped at Nia's downtown accounting office, where she had locked herself in a private glass-walled conference room with her highly encrypted work laptop. As a top-level forensic auditor, Nia possessed elite security clearances and direct access to banking fraud protocols that ordinary citizens could never utilize. We sat side by side, watching the digital web of the family's deeply corrupted finances glow on her large monitor. "It is time to shut the entire operation down," Nia announced, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She did not hesitate for a single second. First, she accessed the joint banking portals she unfortunately shared with Spencer. Using her authorized primary credentials, she initiated an immediate total freeze on all joint checking and high-yield savings accounts, citing suspicious unauthorized wire transfers. The banks complied instantly, locking the accounts down incredibly tight. No money could go in, and more importantly, absolutely no money could ever come out. But Nia was just getting started with her financial demolition. She moved on to the secondary credit cards next. For years, Beatrice had been living a ridiculously lavish lifestyle using a series of platinum credit cards that were quietly guaranteed by Preston and Spencer. Because the brothers had deceitfully linked these accounts to our marital assets to artificially boost their credit limits, Nia had the complete legal right to report them for fraudulent activity. She contacted the fraud departments of 3 major credit card companies, systematically flagging the recent exorbitant charges at the Aspen Resort as unauthorized out-of-state transactions. One by one, the luxury accounts were suspended. The heavy metal platinum cards Beatrice carried around proudly in her designer purse were instantly transformed into entirely worthless pieces of plastic. Next, Nia tackled the final remaining financial lifeline. Preston had established a hidden line of credit using a shadow portfolio tied directly to our primary residential address. Since my name was the only one on the actual deed of the house used as collateral, I had the absolute authority to close it permanently. I dialed the lending institution, verified my identity using the security pins I had uncovered, and demanded an immediate freeze on the credit line due to severe identity theft. The representative confirmed the freeze within a matter of minutes. The financial guillotine had fallen rapidly, and the blade was exceptionally sharp. We had systematically severed every single artery of their cash flow. They had flown to Aspen, relying entirely on our hard-earned money to fund their extravagant illusion of unimaginable wealth. Now they were completely stranded in one of the most expensive resort towns in the entire country, with zero access to liquid cash, maxed-out credit limits, and entirely frozen bank accounts. The $50,000 birthday bash was going to become a massive unpaid liability before the sun even set. The stage was set perfectly for our grand arrival. The civil legal restraining orders were filed, the federal fraud investigations were officially active, and their financial lifeblood had been completely drained. The dominoes were perfectly aligned, and all that was left to do was fly to Colorado and push them over. We booked 2 first-class tickets on the earliest morning flight out of Chicago. Settling into the wide leather seats, Nia and I ordered sparkling water and pulled out our respective laptops. There were no tears, no nervous shaking, and absolutely no second-guessing. We were flying into a war zone, but we were the ones carrying the nuclear codes. I looked out the window as the plane ascended above the clouds, feeling a profound sense of detachment from the woman I had been just 48 hours ago. The naive wife who trusted her husband with her financial future was completely dead. In her place was a highly trained commercial appraiser executing a hostile takeover of her own life. Nia leaned over and tapped my screen, pointing to a final consolidated spreadsheet of Preston and Spencer's offshore liabilities. "We need to agree on the rules of engagement," Nia said, her voice dropping to a low and serious register. "When we walk into that room, Beatrice is going to scream. She will try to provoke us into a public screaming match to make us look like crazy and jealous wives. We cannot give her that satisfaction." I nodded in complete agreement. "There will be no screaming," I replied firmly. "Screaming implies that we have lost control. We are going to let the hard numbers do all the talking. We will simply deliver the facts, present the federal evidence, and let her wealthy friends realize they are drinking champagne with bankrupt criminals." The flight to Colorado was smooth and highly efficient, giving us time to review our documentation one last time. We touched down at the local airport, where the crisp and freezing mountain air hit our faces the second we stepped onto the tarmac. We bypassed the standard taxi line and hired a private black car to take us directly to the ultra-exclusive Silver Peak Resort. The drive up the mountain was stunning, lined with snow-covered pine trees and million-dollar estates. But my focus remained entirely on the upcoming confrontation. As our vehicle pulled up to the grand timber-framed entrance of the resort, a uniformed valet rushed forward to open our doors. The sheer opulence of the building was staggering. Massive stone fireplaces burned brightly in the lobby, casting a warm glow over the imported leather furniture, and the guests wearing head-to-toe designer ski gear. Every single detail of this luxury experience had been funded by our stolen wages. We walked past the front desk without checking in our designer boots, clicking in unison against the polished slate floors. We were not guests. We were first-class executioners arriving to collect a massive debt. We navigated the labyrinth of plush and carpeted corridors, using the resort map I had downloaded on my phone. The air grew thick with the scent of expensive floral arrangements and roasted truffle appetizers as we approached the private event wing. We located the heavy and intricately carved mahogany doors of the Grand Alpine Ballroom. They were left slightly ajar to allow the waitstaff to move freely with trays of gourmet food. Nia and I slipped quietly through the opening, remaining hidden in the deep and velvet-draped shadows at the very back of the massive room. The sight before me was enough to make my stomach turn. The ballroom had been transformed into a grotesque monument to Beatrice's monumental ego. Towering crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceilings, illuminating tables draped in silver silk. Massive ice sculptures carved into the shape of swans flanked a heavily stocked premium bar. At the very front of the room, standing on a raised wooden stage, was my mother-in-law. Beatrice was holding a microphone and basking in the glow of a dedicated spotlight. She was wearing a breathtaking and custom-tailored gown, covered in silver sequins that easily cost $5,000. I knew for an absolute fact that the dress was purchased using the emergency savings account Nia had painstakingly built. Preston and Spencer stood proudly on either side of her, wearing tailored velvet suit jackets and holding up crystal flutes filled with vintage champagne. They looked like the perfect and wealthy heirs to a massive fortune. I felt a surge of pure disgust watching Preston flash his arrogant smile at the crowd. He was celebrating a stolen life while actively plotting to collect my life insurance payout. "I am so incredibly blessed," Beatrice projected into the microphone, her voice dripping with artificial humility and upper-class pretension. She paused to offer a practiced and modest smile to the audience of elite socialites, wealthy investors, and country club executives sitting at the tables. "To have raised two brilliant and successful men who honor the legacy of our family wealth is my greatest achievement. Preston and Spencer are the absolute pillars of the financial community." A round of polite and appreciative applause echoed through the ballroom. Beatrice placed a manicured hand over her heart, soaking in the admiration. Their dedication to taking care of their mother, to providing this breathtaking birthday celebration, is a true testament to the old world values we hold so very dear. In a world that so often forgets the importance of generational wealth and family loyalty, my boys stand as shining examples of pure excellence. Nia let out a soft and sharp exhale next to me. Her jaw clenched tight. Beatrice was standing on a stage built entirely on federal wire fraud and stolen equity, preaching to her elite friends about generational wealth that had vanished 3 years ago. I gave Nia a single and sharp nod. It was time to pull the plug on this lavish production. While Nia remained positioned in the shadows to block the main exit, I detached from the back wall and moved silently along the perimeter of the ballroom. My eyes were locked on the elevated technical booth situated in the far right corner. A young resort technician wearing a black polo shirt was sitting behind a complex soundboard and a glowing laptop managing the ambient lighting and the generic birthday slideshow currently looping on the massive projector screen behind Beatrice. I approached the booth with the authoritative and unbothered confidence of a corporate executive running a highly scheduled board meeting. I did not sneak or hesitate. I walked straight up the short flight of carpeted steps and stood beside the technician. He looked up, startled by my sudden appearance. Before he could ask for my credentials, I flashed him my most professional and commanding smile and held out a silver USB drive. "Hello," I whispered, keeping my tone brisk and official. "The family requested a last-minute surprise presentation for the birthday girl. It is a special tribute from her sons. I need you to override the current display and run the primary file on this drive immediately." The technician hesitated for a fraction of a second, his hands hovering over the keyboard. "I usually need approval from the event coordinator for media changes," he whispered back, glancing nervously toward the floor manager across the room. I leaned in slightly, projecting absolute corporate authority. "Preston arranged this directly with the resort management this morning. It is the highlight of the entire birthday toast, and he is going to wrap up his speech in exactly 30 seconds. If we miss the cue, he will be incredibly disappointed. And I guarantee you do not want to be the reason this expensive surprise is ruined." The threat of angering a high-paying VIP guest worked instantly. The technician nodded quickly, taking the USB drive from my hand and plugging it directly into the main presentation laptop. "Just give me 1 second to route the input to the main projector," he murmured, his fingers flying across the trackpad. I stood perfectly still, my eyes fixed on the massive and high-definition screen behind the stage. Beatrice was just finishing her pretentious speech, raising her champagne flute high into the air to initiate the final toast. Preston and Spencer mirrored her movement, their faces plastered with arrogant and stolen joy. "To family, to legacy, and to a beautiful future," Beatrice declared loudly. The guests raised their glasses in unison. Right at that exact second, the technician pressed the enter key. The generic and sparkling birthday graphics completely vanished from the screen. A bright and blinding white light flooded the stage as the projector calibrated the new input. I stepped back from the booth and turned my full attention to the front of the room. my heart beating with the cold and steady rhythm of a metronome. The financial guillotine was fully armed, the blade was raised high into the air, and the entire high society crowd was about to witness the absolute destruction of the fake old money empire. The white light on the massive projector screen sharpened into razor-clear focus, cutting through the dim, luxurious ballroom. The image that materialized behind Beatrice was not a heartwarming montage of cherished family memories. It was a high-definition scan of the forged deed of trust for the $400,000 second mortgage on my Chicago brownstone. At the very bottom of the towering 20-foot display, a thick, bright red digital circle highlighted my forged signature. The ballroom, previously buzzing with the polite chatter of wealthy socialites, fell into a sudden confused silence. People squinted, trying to comprehend why a legal loan document was being broadcast at a birthday gala. Beatrice turned around, her smile freezing in place as her eyes locked onto the screen. She blinked rapidly, her perfectly contoured face registering the initial wave of confusion before the sheer horror began to set in. Preston mirrored her reaction, his crystal champagne flute lowering slowly as the blood drained from his face. Before the crowd could even process the mortgage document, the presentation advanced to the next slide with a sharp click. A complex, meticulously color-coded financial spreadsheet filled the screen. It was the comprehensive forensic audit Naya had generated, exposing Preston's $800,000 black hole of offshore cryptocurrency losses and illegal Caribbean sports betting debts. Every single catastrophic financial failure was laid bare in massive font. The guests, many of whom were conservative investors and country club board members, began to murmur. The whispers escalated into gasps of shock as they recognized the staggering scale of the financial ruin being displayed. Preston opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He was paralyzed by the glaring, undeniable proof of his complete incompetence and fraud. Then came the final devastating slide. The screen transitioned to high-resolution screenshots of the text messages extracted directly from the prepaid burner phone. The text bubbles were magnified so largely that even the guests seated at the very back of the room could read every single word with absolute clarity. The exchange between Beatrice and Preston glowed with lethal intent. Preston's message reading, "I forged the witness signature yesterday. If anything happens to her, the $2 million goes straight to the new trust." And Beatrice's chilling response, "Good. Make sure she stays entirely out of the accounts this weekend." The collective gasp that erupted from the elite crowd was deafening. This was no longer just an embarrassing revelation of bankruptcy or poor financial management. They were looking at premeditated conspiracy to commit insurance fraud laced with a terrifying implication of murder. Several prominent women recoiled immediately, covering their mouths in absolute genuine horror. Wealthy investors who had been shaking Preston's hand just moments ago took immediate disgusted steps backward, actively distancing themselves from the stage. The illusion of the untouchable affluent family had been completely shattered in less than 60 seconds. The screen remained frozen on that terrifying text exchange, casting a harsh cold glow over the three exposed frauds standing helplessly on the stage. I stepped out from the heavy shadows at the back of the room, Nia, moving in perfect synchronization right beside me. We walked down the center aisle of the ballroom with deliberate precision. The sea of horrified guests parted for us instantly, creating a wide, clear path leading directly to the stage. Our designer boots echoed against the polished marble floors, the only sound cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. Beatrice spotted us first. Her face contorted from shock into a mask of desperate rage. She pointed a trembling finger in our direction. "Turn that screen off immediately!" Beatrice shrieked, her voice cracking under the weight of her absolute humiliation. "Security, get these classless women out of here right now!" She looked wildly at the waitstaff, but nobody moved. No one wanted to intervene in a spectacular high society implosion. Preston finally snapped out of his paralyzed trance. He jumped down from the raised stage and rushed toward me, his tailored velvet suit suddenly looking absurd rather than imposing. He stopped a few feet away, his chest heaving, sweat beading on his forehead, despite the freezing mountain air outside. "Caroline, honey, please." Preston stammered, his polished corporate facade crumbling into a pathetic, desperate mess. He reached out, attempting to grab my arm, but I stepped back smoothly, my eyes flashing a warning that stopped him dead in his tracks. "You are taking this entirely out of context," he pleaded, dropping his voice to a whisper, hoping to contain the damage before it spread further. "We are married. We are a team. My debts are our debts. The house equity was just a temporary bridge loan to secure a massive return for our future. We can fix this quietly at home. Do not do this here." I did not lower my voice. I wanted every single investor, socialite, and country club executive in that room to hear my response loud and clear. "There is no R anymore, Preston," I stated, my voice ringing with absolute icy authority. "My money is mine. Your $800,000 gambling debt and your forged mortgage are entirely yours. You thought you could leverage my hard-earned equity to cover your degenerate failures, but you made a fatal error. Forging a signature on a federally backed mortgage and wiring those stolen funds across state lines to fund illegal offshore betting syndicates is not a marital dispute. It is a federal crime." I watched his ego shatter into a million pieces right in front of me. The arrogant wealth manager was gone, replaced by a terrified criminal realizing the trap had closed. "I am not going to pay for your mistakes," I continued, ruthlessly locking eyes with him. "The Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Federal Housing Finance Agency already have the original forged documents and the complete digital audit of your wire transfers. Those federal fraud charges belong solely to you, and I look forward to watching you explain your brilliant investment strategy to a federal judge." Spencer, who had been standing frozen on the raised wooden stage in stunned silence, finally realized the catastrophic magnitude of the situation. He scrambled down the wooden steps, bypassing his brother and rushing directly toward Nia. His face was a portrait of sheer panic. "Nia, baby, please," Spencer begged, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. "Let us just step outside and talk about this reasonably. We can explain the wire transfers. Mom was in trouble, and we just needed a little bit of time to get the family accounts back in order. You are overreacting. Do not ruin everything over a simple misunderstanding." Nia did not flinch at all. She did not yell, and she certainly did not let him manipulate the narrative. She simply looked at him with a gaze so fiercely cold, it could have frozen the entire mountain range outside. With slow, deliberate movements, Nia reached for her left hand. She slid the 2-carat diamond wedding ring off her finger. Spencer watched her, his eyes widening in terror as he realized exactly what she was about to do. Nia held the ring over Spencer's crystal champagne flute, which he was still clutching tightly in his shaking hand, and dropped it. The heavy diamond hit the bottom of the glass with a sharp, final clink, sinking into the expensive champagne. "I am an auditor," Spencer Nia said, her voice projecting clearly across the silent ballroom. "I do not overreact. I follow the money, and the money says you are a thief." Nia turned away from her husband and faced the crowd of elite guests who were hanging on her every word. "Since we are clearing the air tonight, I think all of Beatrice's esteemed friends should know the absolute truth," Nia announced loudly. "The legendary generational family trust that Beatrice constantly brags about has been completely bankrupt for 3 long years. Every single cent of their old money is gone, squandered on failed investments and an obsession with maintaining a fake upper-class image." Beatrice gasped, clutching her chest as if she had been physically struck. The socialites sitting at the front tables began whispering furiously, their eyes darting over Beatrice's expensive attire. "That breathtaking $5,000 sequined gown Beatrice is wearing right now," Nia continued, gesturing toward the stage, "was purchased using a fraudulent wire transfer stolen directly from my personal emergency savings account. This entire lavish birthday celebration, the ice sculptures, the premium caviar, the luxury chalet was funded entirely by the paychecks Caroline and I earned. You are not drinking champagne provided by a wealthy matriarch. You are participating in an event funded by stolen wages and federal wire fraud." The devastation was absolute. The wealthy guests, the exact people Beatrice had spent decades trying to impress and dominate, were staring at her with blatant disgust. The facade was completely obliterated. The old money empire was nothing but dust. And Nia and I had just blown it all away. The heavy silence in the ballroom was suddenly broken by the sharp clearing of a throat. Mr. Kensington, the impeccably dressed general manager of the Silver Peak Resort, marched through the parted crowd. He did not look pleased at all. He stepped directly up to the stage, completely ignoring the dramatic tension, and handed Beatrice a sleek black leather folio. "Ma'am," the manager announced, his voice carrying easily across the cavernous room. "I need you to provide an alternative method of payment immediately. We attempted to authorize the final $50,000 charge for this event, and every single one of your 6 platinum credit cards has declined." Beatrice turned an alarming shade of gray. She snatched the folio, her hands trembling violently as she stared at the printed receipt stamped with the word "declined" in bold red ink. "There must be a mistake with the bank," she stammered, looking frantically at Preston. "Preston, give the man your corporate card." Preston patted his jacket pockets, his breathing growing shallow and erratic. "I left my wallet in the suite," he lied, backing away from the angry manager. "I will go get it right now." But Preston never made it to the exit. The heavy mahogany doors at the back of the ballroom swung wide open, hitting the walls with a thunderous crash. 4 local Aspen police officers and 2 federal agents wearing tactical jackets emblazoned with the FBI logo strode into the room. The lead agent, a tall, no-nonsense man holding a thick file, locked eyes with my husband. Preston, the agent, commanded, his voice booming with absolute federal authority. "Keep your hands where I can see them." Preston froze, his arrogant posture completely collapsing as the officers quickly surrounded the stage. "You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and utilizing federally insured institutions to fund illegal offshore gambling syndicates." The agent pulled a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back." Beatrice screamed, reaching out to grab her son, but a police officer swiftly stepped between them, forcing her back. Spencer stood paralyzed, watching in sheer horror as the cold metal cuffs snapped shut around his brother with a harsh, final click. The elite socialites, investors, and country club friends did not wait to see the rest of the spectacle. They immediately scrambled for the exits, grabbing their expensive coats and abandoning their half-empty champagne flutes. Nobody wanted their reputation associated with a highly publicized federal raid. In less than 2 minutes, the grand ballroom was entirely deserted, save for the police, the resort manager demanding his money, and the shattered remnants of the family. Nia and I stood quietly by the ice sculptures, watching the authorities escort my criminal husband out the doors. We did not say a word. We simply turned around, walked out into the crisp mountain air, and hailed a cab to the airport. The execution was complete. 6 months later, the Chicago skyline sparkled beautifully against the cool autumn evening. I sat comfortably on the private rooftop balcony of my Lincoln Park brownstone, pouring a generous glass of expensive vintage Cabernet. Nia sat in the lounge chair across from me, looking absolutely radiant in a silk evening set. We clinked our crystal wine glasses together, the clear ringing sound serving as a perfect toast to our hard-won freedom. The legal aftermath of the Aspen disaster had been swift, brutal, and deeply satisfying. Preston was currently sitting in a federal holding facility, denied bail by a judge who accurately deemed his offshore betting ties a massive flight risk. He was awaiting a highly publicized criminal trial, facing up to 20 years in federal prison for the mortgage fraud alone. The family court judge, presented with the overwhelming evidence of his financial crimes, had granted me an expedited divorce and awarded me sole ownership of the brownstone. Preston forfeited any right to my assets the moment he forged my signature. Spencer had not fared much better. Nia finalized her divorce with ruthless efficiency, stripping him of the emergency funds he tried to steal and leaving him to rent a tiny, dilapidated studio apartment on the outskirts of the city. But the most poetic justice of all belonged to Beatrice. Her massive country club debts and the unpaid $50,000 bill from the Silver Peak Resort had finally caught up with her. With her sons legally barred from touching our incomes and her wealthy friends treating her like a highly contagious disease, Beatrice was forced to face actual reality. The woman who used to wear $5,000 gowns and mock working-class professionals was now employed as a front desk receptionist at a budget strip mall hair salon. She spent her days answering phones and sweeping up hair clippings just to pay off the interest on her massive credit card judgments. She had absolutely nothing left but her towering, crushing debt. Nia took a slow sip of her wine and smiled at me. "I reviewed the final quarterly projections for your appraisal firm today," she said, her eyes shining with genuine pride. "Your revenue is up 30% since you dropped the dead weight." I smiled back, feeling a profound, unshakable sense of peace settling over my entire life. We had walked through absolute fire, but we had not burned. Instead, we had incinerated the parasites who tried to bleed us dry. We protected our wealth, defended our careers, and reclaimed our entire futures. I looked across the balcony at Nia, realizing that while I had lost a toxic marriage, I had gained an incredibly brilliant, loyal sister. We had successfully destroyed the fake old money empire and built a true unbreakable family in each other. The ultimate revenge was not just watching them lose everything. It was watching ourselves thrive completely without them, proving that the best return on investment is always betting on your own strength. The most profound lesson from Caroline's journey is that financial independence and sharp boundaries are your greatest shields against betrayal. When the people who should protect you turn out to be parasites, tears will not save you, but hard evidence and a cool head certainly will. Caroline did not break down. She weaponized her grief into calculated action, proving that true power lies in knowing your worth and refusing to be a victim. Marriage does not entitle anyone to your hard-earned life. Share this story to empower someone who needs it and comment below with your own thoughts.